Hey, welcome back to the Build It Basement. I'm Kerm, and today we're starting our rat rig V-Core 4 500mm IDEX printer that is just plain huge. I mean, huge. Look at this. So most people start with these things, which is part of the frame, but that's not what the manual actually starts. The manual starts with some parts prep. Today we're going to look at prepping our printed parts. A lot of P's there, but there are some important things to note and mention. Whether you're a first-time builder or this is your 10th printer, there are some things that we want to look at. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. All right, so the rat rig comes with two different manuals really. So let's look at those real quick because there's two ways of doing this. There is the rat rig build manual, which is right here at the rat rig docs location. So docs.ratrig.com, V-Core 4, etc., etc. And you can go through and you can do it here. And there's also a Dozuki version of the manual, which is right here. Don't really know which one's the better of the two, to be honest. I will tell you that this one allows for comments to be made. This one right here does not, as far as I can tell. Yeah, you have two different versions to work with here. This only shows one completion on it, so it's kind of interesting, but it's, yeah. So I'm gonna go back to the one that's actually on the docs.ratrig.com website, just because it's on their website, I guess, for no other reason. So let's start right there, and today, basically, we're just gonna look at the parts prep, and this is actually the preparation of building our rat rig. Since everybody seems to be starting with the frame, which is actually not the first step of building this printer, we're going to start off where we are told in the instruction is the first step to build this printer, which is an introduction, looking at all the parts, checking out all the parts, make sure all the parts are where we need them to be, and then quite honestly, make sure we have all the parts, because I got a feeling I don't have all the parts, and I know I don't have all the parts. So let's look into this. All right, so first things first, our introduction, we're gonna widescreen this thing right up and get into this real quick, and we're gonna skip over. They're telling us that we need certain parts here, certain tools, tape measure. Preferably, I would get yourself a metric one if you can, make it easier since all this is metric. Different types of crimpers. Basically, that comes down to a preference of what you like. There are engineering crimpers as well as standard crimpers. The difference being that an engineering crimper is a crimper that utilizes basically one crimp at a time. This guy right here, if I was to show you, so they're thinner. These are thinner crimpers right here, and on these crimpers, when you actually go to crimp things, basically you are crimping just either the inner or the outer at the time that you're doing it. You don't crimp them both. So those have benefits in terms of, especially if you're starting out. So you can crimp your center conductor first, and then crimp your outer on your insulation, because then you can make sure you have a clean, secure crimp on that center conductor. However, these will take you nearly twice as long, if not more, to do, because they don't hold the crimp as well, and obviously you have to crimp twice to do them. My preference is a crimper that basically allows you to crimp both things at the same time, and when it comes down to it, these, or this type of crimper, these iWise, these are iCrimps, which is similar. These basically crimp both the center or the center conductor as well as the insulation at the same time. So you can actually place your crimp in them, but we're not going to need these for a while, but they are in the introduction, so we're going over them. So let's get back to the intro. The other tools you basically need are your basics, you know, your keys and possibly something to square with. Heat inserts. I personally utilize my heat inserter. I forget what this is called exactly. It's the Frax, that's what it's called. So this is the Frax right here. This guy, let's go widescreen on that. Frax right there. It's this guy right here. This is on a Kinematics mount, so it always goes down straight no matter where I am. You don't need anything as fancy as this. However, if you do want something like this, if you do plan on building printers or building other projects that require heat inserts, this particular tool is very good. It has a built-in soldering iron, which is mounted directly on this. It doesn't need to be on here permanently, but this is mounted pretty permanent because I do use this quite frequently. It's got a finger guard on here as well. And the iron comes out pretty much to any place I need it to come out to. I can get past the center of my table, which is where I do most of my heat inserts for video. and when I'm working, and if I needed to get a little bit further over, I could obviously just work a little bit further over. And I can move this over as well, but it'd be right in my camera shot, which is why it is where it is. Heat insert tools in general, you basically have a tip on them that you can put on your soldering iron, different sizes depending on what you want to do. And you can also just utilize a soldering tip that you've gone and kind of clipped off the point on that. You can do it without clipping off the point, but I strongly suggest you do, because if you don't, then that soldering point more often than not is going to wind up getting into the plastic below it. When you do a heat insert, I suggest approximately 10 degrees higher than the print temperature that you use when you're printing with that particular type of plastic. There's a lot of P's there. So if you're doing, say, PLA with a heat insert, and you print your PLA at 220, then I would put your heat insert at about 230. ABS, if you're printing at about 270, then 280. Somewhere in that ballpark. Nylon being different, obviously. Basically 10 degrees higher than what you print at, and that allows the plastic to flow around the actual heat insert. And I'll show you one of those guys up close if you're not familiar with that. Give me a, let's see here, we want to do this. So let's see if we can get that in. Come on, there we go. So this is a heat insert, this little guy right here. It's got nubs on it that basically go in two different directions. So when you insert this into the plastic with that smooth, shiny, flat part first, kind of downwards like so. Let me get this vertically correct, like so. That goes into the plastic, and then basically the grooves on there collect the plastic as it melts into the rest of the piece that you're doing. So very helpful, good tool to have if you want one. KB3D has these, or a couple other places, but I'll try to leave a link down below. Back to the manual. So this right here, the manual and heat inserts. I don't know what they're telling you specifically, but they're telling you not to use temperature higher than 280 because you release fumes from your ABS. So pretty close to what I was saying a moment ago about if you print at 270, do this at 280. If you do 265, you get the point. So pretty easy. You want to put them in vertical. You want to get them down so they're flush with the actual printed part that you're doing here, and they're kind of going over this stuff, which is really nice to see in a manual. And they're showing you basically where the parts go and all the stuff, and they're talking about the heat inserts. And then the big thing, the big reason why I want to start this and kind of go slow with this whole build and kind of talk about this is because I did receive a little love letter inside my packaging that basically stated that they found that putting the heat inserts in the printed parts was causing a slowdown, go figure, and not allowing them to get as many kits out as they wanted to get, which is fine. And I've never actually purchased a kit that came with printed parts, so I don't know what the norm is on that. Usually you print your own printed parts for your 3D printer build. RatRig does a little differently, and I don't know if they're still not putting the heat inserts in or if that's something they've moved over to completely. There's not a lot of real information to go back and forth on some of this stuff. So have it be known that if you do buy a RatRig kit, although it does come with all the printed parts, those printed parts will not come with the basically the heat inserts already in them. So keep that in mind. All right. So they're talking about right here how to put in or where to put in these heat insert parts. And again, when you put those in, make sure you get them flush to the top. We'll look at a couple here in a second. And you want to make sure you basically put them in the right places. They're not difficult to get out, but you're going to change the size of your hole if you do take them out. So let's look at that part. Got it right here on the desk. So this is the part that's on the screen pretty much. It is an arm that holds the print bed when you assemble the printer. So basically you have heat inserts on here in three different locations, this side, as well as the what would be the top. And when you put these in, if you look closely, they are all flush, or in there pretty good. You can sometimes leave or show a little bit of a bump around them when you put them in, simply because they're offsetting some of the plastic. But these look pretty good, and that's what you kind of want to look like. You want them to be pretty straight in there as well. It's the other big thing. Some people like to basically insert these in and then push down on the part on a flat surface to do that, or use a tool to do that. So basically heat up, put it in, and then push down on it with a flat tool. I find if you use something or a device that allows you to put them in straight in the first place, it's not really an issue. You don't have to deal with that. But that is a tip if you're having troubles with that. And the way that you can basically tell how straight your heat inserts are going in is to place a screw into heat insert and see how straight it is. They don't need to be exactly 100% flush, but they do need to be pretty good. So parts in general. So let's look at parts real quick here. And let's talk about a couple things about those parts. So what you're looking at right now is basically one of the first screens where they talk about some of the parts and that you're gonna put heat inserts into them. And as that moves on, these are some corner brackets, some braces. These right here also are gonna require glue. Let's look at those. So that is this piece right here that we were just looking at a moment ago. And basically what it happens here is it comes in two parts. You have your printed part here, which is the large part that is a corner, and then you have your small plastic piece inside here, your green piece, which gets super glued in. What you wind up doing is putting 3 dabs of super glue in there just to hold the plastic onto that. It's pretty simple. It's not snap in, it's not anything special. It's not a 2-color part. However, there are some 2-color parts, very few of them, but there are some. Beyond that, let's get to some other parts here. There are some smaller parts, such as this one, where you may have to put, I didn't grab the right one, but yeah, there are some parts where you may have a little bit more difficulty putting the actual heat inserts in them. And when I say that, I mean because they don't necessarily hold themselves very well. What I tend to tell people is try to find the flattest side of that object. If there is no flat sides on that object, what I suggest doing is actually bringing the object up to the tool, because you can tell a lot more about the direction, from the part you're holding in times like that. So you can kind of get it in there more straight if you actually use the part as opposed to the heat tool to bring it down in for that type of smaller part. So this is one of the things I wanted to mention is they did a really great job of making this manual out and putting all the parts and pieces in here and having really good pictures of all the parts and pieces, but they don't necessarily match the color of the part that is in the manual, which isn't a huge deal really, but at the same time it kind of is a huge deal, because you would expect that the parts, if they're going to have them in color, are going to match. So do be aware that when you're building this printer, some of the parts that you may receive in your printed parts won't necessarily match the exact color of the printed part in the manual. This is an instance right here. This is in the back where cabling comes up. And in my case, mine came across as green. However, in the manual, it's definitely shown here in black, which caused me to look around to make sure I didn't have more than one, or there wasn't something else kind of weird going on there. But there, obviously wasn't. That was a part I had. It was just in a different color. Kind of odd. This one right here is interesting. And the reason why it's interesting is when you have a part like this, when you basically have something where the part has kind of an offset or has degrees of non-straightness. They're not vertical, they're not horizontal. There's kind of some weird geometry happening here. It's a little bit more difficult to put the heat set in. And again, these are the parts where you definitely want to probably bring the part up to the heat insert tool or soldering iron, whatever. Or if you're just using a freehand soldering iron, it won't make that much of a difference. But if you are using a tool, it kind of helps to bring the part up as opposed to bringing the tool down for those type of instances. So that's one right there for you. Let's see here. What else was there I wanted to mention? A lot of these parts are in duplicate. This part, this part's a big thing. So I am kind of not grasping at straws and definitely not splitting hairs here. But I do have certain expectations when you buy something and it comes with stuff. And printed parts are no different if it comes with printed parts. The printed parts, 1 should be all there, 2 should be preferably the correct color based on the kit that you have, considering that they match the manual, unless it's something where they, you could mix and match or choose custom colors. And finally, the part should be printed in the proper way, the right amount of walls, tops, bottoms, and infill. But again, with the start on that, the big thing here is the parts should all be in the kit. And these little LED holders that I am holding currently were 100% not in my kit. Now, why were they not in the kit? I have no idea. Did I miss them? 100% not. I will look through everything, and I want to print my own. Not a big deal for me, not a big deal for a lot of people, but if this is your first printer and you do not have a printer, then your ability to actually print the missing parts is kind of a sore spot. So I don't know that I necessarily suggest anybody builds a printer like this as their first printer, but rat rig, come on, you got to have all the parts in the kit if you're going to provide all the parts, right? So let's look here. These, I'll open that back up. These messages that they give you here are a little bit odd to me. Basically, they're giving you kind of a choose your own story here when it comes to it. So basically, depending on if you're building just the vCore 4 or vCore 4 hybrid or vCore 4 IDEX, they have you go to different places in the manual based on where you are in the manual. Not hugely bad, I guess, but I don't quite understand why. I don't think it's a needed thing. I think they could basically outline that you need to do things in duplicate if you have them in duplicate without having to say to go to a different place and have a different section of a manual. I don't think the build really changes much other than when you get to adding in the motors for the hybrid to do the IDEX. So most of this beginner stuff, especially with this preparation stuff, not sure why they have you jumping around. Not a big fan of it. So right here they want us specifically, because we are doing an IDEX version of this printer, we're going to skip to this printed part thing. And another part I don't like about this necessarily is the fact that now they're automatically bringing us back to the other manual, the one I mentioned in the beginning, the Dazuki manual. So in the Dazuki manual, they have us basically doing what we would have been doing anyways in the regular build manual, but they don't bring us there the way they should. So right here, they want us to go to the electronics enclosure portion of this, which I don't see here. I see electronics, I don't see electronic enclosure. So basically what they want you to do is skip through all this. CoreXY hybrid toolhead printed parts. It's just a little bit confusing. So I think the manual, the way it's built, I think, first of all, let me say this. I think the manual is great. I love, the photography they give you and everything like that. I think the notes are really good. But I don't like manuals that skip around. I mentioned this before in a previous build when we did an LDO kit where basically you're utilizing an LDO manual as well as a Voron manual. And then you had a cheat sheet that basically told you which manual to use and what pages to jump around to. That's not the way manuals are supposed to work. When you build something, it should be step by step by step. There shouldn't be, if you're doing this, then skip over these steps, because once you do that, most of the time you're gonna have to come back anyways and do these other steps. So at the end of those steps, it's going to tell you if you are doing this and you skipped here, then go back to here. That's confusing, it's unneeded, and people should stop doing that, my opinion. All right, so let's just go ahead, because they're telling us we need to go here, and let's look at the electronics enclosure prep parts. So electronic enclosure prep parts, basically what you're looking at here for the most part are some wire guides that we have to put heat inserts into, as well as your octopus mount, your Raspberry Pi mount, and some corner braces. And I've already gone ahead and put all these in because nobody wants to watch me, at least I don't think anybody wants to watch me put heat inserts in for an hour and a half. So these are all done. These all have them in here. Nothing particularly interesting about these parts. Plus kudos, whatever you want to say, to Rat Rig for actually separating things into baggies. So this right here is your electronics printed parts bundle. So I like the fact they do that. I also like the part that they actually give everything a SKU. So, you know, everything that's tied to that or that type of part of that is tied to a specific SKU number. So we have all those done. We already did that. We'll look through this, and I don't think there's a lot here to really mention in terms of specifically different things. I will say one thing that I'm not hugely impressed with some of the print quality on some of these parts, specifically some of the parts that are probably not really required to be overly nice. These overhangs right here, you know, this is going to be inside your printer. It's going to be facing this way, so you're not going to see it really. But this part in general, these parts in general, sometimes some of them don't look the best. They could look a lot better, but they found a balance between speed possibly and looks. And sometimes it seems like they've gone a little bit more biased towards the speed aspect of things than the looks type of thing, which again, people hate waiting for things. So those are tough decisions to make. So I'm not faulting them for that decision. So we have all these, the heat inserts that go into these. You can follow along through the manual. There's nothing too complicated here. It's pretty easy. I'm not going to bore everybody with those things. And then here again, we have a part where it tells you if you're building the CoreXY variant to skip the preparing of the electronics components. If you are building the hybrid IDEX, to continue following these next steps. So continue through doing all these parts. And then another time here, another time where they're telling you again that if you're doing this, then go here. If you're not doing this, then go there. There's just too much of it, too much. So let's see here. We were building the IDEX, so we were skipping to prep electronic components at this point in time, but you really don't have to. So one of the things that I will say is at this point right here in this manual, they're asking you, if you're building the CoreXY hybrid to skip the electronic parts, if you're doing IDEX and continue the following, it really wouldn't make a big difference if you did either or. But this is the way you're going to be going here. So let's look at these parts real quick. I'll put these ones away. Put these guys away real quick. And this portion of the manual really isn't covered by anybody else, and it's pretty boring per se, but I think it's important to mention that this is a part of the build. And I am going through it relatively quickly because I don't want people to kind of turn away from this build or this build series because of this video. So I'm going through these parts quickly, and I apologize if you really wanted to see me put all the heat inserts in, but I don't think it's necessary for most people. So I apologize in advance if this isn't the type of video you actually wanted for this particular point in the build series, but I guarantee you moving forward in the future, we're going to be looking more in depth on all the parts. So this is the IDEX toolhead parts here, and a couple things I want to look at here just to show, because I have prepped these already, is you're going to have parts that are mirrors of each other, because you're going to have two different heads. So you'll have a left and a right. You're going to have these fan shrouds, which actually were printed with two colors, which is kind of cool, right? The way they did it here is basically, I don't know that they used two separate heads or not, but they probably did, but to save time and speed, they did basically a layer on, layer off scenario where they printed black, then they switched over to the rat rig green, and then switched back to black. So pretty simple thing to do that anybody can do really with any printer. You guys don't really need an IDEX printer or a multicolor printer to do color like this. Simple pause in your G-code and a switching of the filament will do that. And we can talk about that if you leave a comment down below where you want to learn about things like that. Pretty simple things you can do. Not everybody knows about them, but most people do. But more than happy to talk about those at some point if you're interested. This part right here and some of these parts that are kind of intricate, these are hard to clean up. And like I was saying before, this is actually a visual part that people see when you build this printer. So it's not the best quality look of a part really, and like I said, cleanup was kind of difficult. I honestly tend not to have much cleanup on parts that I print personally. I don't I don't usually have to clean up parts, but these were a little rough around the edges, literally. So, not a big fan of that. I'm thinking possibly, you know, maybe if they slowed things down by 10 or 20%, they might be able to help with some of that. But again, tough decisions to be made, depending on how many kits you want to get out. All right, so again, just a bunch of, you know, putting in heat inserts for these parts. Nothing major, nothing different, nothing big. Fan shrouds, things like that. These are your IDEX parts. This right here, this part right here, where they're showing these arrows. So that right there is kind of interesting. They did something really good and really cool right there. So what they did is they built in sacrificial plastic, meaning that when they printed it, or if you're printing your own parts for some reason, you basically can pull the part apart and it has the structure underneath it, so you don't need to add anything structurally to the part when you're slicing it. So you don't need anything basically additional. You don't need to add anything like trees or anything like that to the part. That will pop out. It's basically designed into the part to come off of the part once you print it, which is something that is cool they did in their design, so I got to give them props to that as well. All right, so again, more heat inserts, same thing, you're doing it multiple times. And again, on those parts right here where they're doing it multiple times, I'm a big fan of them saying basically, you know, repeat with similar part or repeat with mirrored part as opposed to showing it twice. Those types of things. Nothing huge, just stuff to mention. So this goes on and on and on and on and on. And then basically we get to tools for the section of the guide where we get into prepping hot ends and things like that. So, lots of parts, lots of stuff, lots of printed parts. I would say in general this probably saves the average person probably about 24 to 30 hours worth of printing, assuming that they print it at a decent quality on a decent speed on their printer. If they had put the heat inserts, it probably would have saved another hour or two to the average person building this together. But you know, not a huge deal really when it comes down to it, because you have your parts, they're given to you in the kit, and it's all part of one thing. Not a big fan of the fact that they, you know, basically changed the game a little bit and put a little note on there saying that they aren't doing the heat inserts anymore. Surprise. But luckily they do say that they provide us enough heat inserts, which I was kind of weary of, so I bought a bunch more. So I got to say at this point, you know, it's definitely different than a Voron in terms of what the parts are. I built a few Vorons in my day. The parts look to be adequate. I would say 80 to 90% of what I would like to see in terms of quality of the actual prints. Functionally, they're probably 100% of what you actually need. So next section of this video is going to be coming up is going to be electronics prep, since we get the parts prep. Once we do electronics prep, we're going to move on from there, and we're actually going to do a lot more in-depth stuff. But simply crimping and heat inserts and things like that aren't things that people want to watch. So keeping it short on this one, and hopefully I'll see you next time.